Anti-pipeline protests, part of a national day of action to stop the Kinder Morgan buyout.
These demonstrators want to see the federal government bail on that project altogether. You can see they're starting to chant now. Minister Raybould's not here today. In fact, the office is closed. But I asked if she was here today, what they would tell her to her face.
What is wrong with you? I can't even understand how an MP like Jody Wilson-Raybould, who shares the values of this movement, I truly believe, can stand up there and defend this project. We need her to represent the community that she comes from here and to be out and saying to her boss, this is a bad decision.
Now this day of action is all about fighting the pipeline right across the country. Events like this taking place at more than 100 MP offices. We saw one this morning outside Finance Minister Bill Morneau's office in Toronto, also in Halifax, Ottawa, Winnipeg, with a big rally to be held outside Prime Minister Trudeau's office in Montreal late this afternoon. That's kind of where it will all culminate. You can see things really have ramped up here, Sonia. People are starting to get vocal, and there's a sign to honk if you do not support the pipeline. They're getting a lot of people honk as they drive along this stretch as well. Now, I mentioned Jody Wilson-Raybould is not here today. That's because she's in Ottawa. I did ask her for a comment. She sent me a comment just saying she respects people's right to protest lawfully and peacefully, and look around, just have a listen. You can be sure people are going to be doing that for a long time until this pipeline gets stopped in its tracks.
Let's check in with our Keith Baldry for more on this. And Keith, obviously the opposition to the pipeline plan is not going away.
Well, you haven't seen anything yet, Sophie. I mean, today is just a taste of what's to come on the protest front against the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which has changed a little bit now that the Justin Trudeau government has bought it and intends to proceed with construction. So there's going to be a lot of arrests over the next few months. But today began with demonstrations outside a number of MPs' offices, and we caught up with a couple of protesters earlier today.
Because I'm adamantly opposed to buying Kinder Morgan with Canadian taxpayers' money. I'm also very much against the pipeline, period, because we don't need another bitumen pipeline.
This is not in the national interest. This is in the interest of a very narrow section of Alberta that he needs to curry political favor with. The fact of the matter is, Canada doesn't make good money on oil sands revenues.
Trudeau's not backing down from this fight, but we'll see if his heart's still in it 6 months from now, when you got a lot more protests than what we saw today and a lot more arrests than we've had up until now for civil disobedience.
Doesn't look like protesters are backing down either. All right, thanks for that, Keith.
More evidence today that a federal decision to spend billions of dollars of your money on a pipeline is going to face a fight.
Protesters took their complaints to the offices of Liberal MPs across the country. Read Feist now on what the government is up against.
Pipeline projects, turn them down.
Loud and clear, in over 100 Canadian cities, anti-pipeline protesters made their voices heard.
No pipeline, no pipeline.
In Toronto, a group gathered in front of Finance Minister Bill Morneau's office. He announced the government's $4.5 billion deal to buy Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline.
We believe that taxpayer dollars should not go to fund things like a risky tar sands pipeline and tanker project.
In BC, where the Premier is dead set against the energy expansion project.
This is not in the national interest. This is in the interest of a very narrow section of Alberta that he needs to curry political favor with.
We're here to stop the buyout. We're here to stop the buyout.
In that province, evidence of support. Both anti- and pro-pipeline activists kept apart by police.
What do we want? Pipelines! When do we want them? Now!
I think that the government is wasting our money. Why buy something that they could get for free?
Part of the deal now coming to light, two $1.5 million bonuses for Kinder Morgan Canada executives if they see the project through.
Why is the Prime Minister paying mega bonuses to millionaires with taxpayer dollars while middle-class Canadians in the same industry struggle to find work?
The Finance Minister didn't answer.
We'd like to focus on the good news for Canadians.
The demand for energy.
Pipelines are safer than rail, which is where this product will be if it's not in a pipeline.
But that won't silence the opposition. Global News, Calgary.
The Liberals also had to face some pipeline heat during question period yesterday over where that taxpayer money is going.
Why is it that every time the Prime Minister bails out a big company, executives get paid off?
Right on.
The opposition grilled Trudeau over the news that Kinder Morgan Canada is paying 2 senior executives $1.5 million bonuses to ensure they stay with the company. Kinder Morgan says the payments are consistent with industry practice, but the Conservatives say the timing of the filing on the same day as the buyout is suspicious.
Certainly, it's basically a fact of political life now for the Prime Minister that anytime he comes to BC, I think you can guarantee there will be protesters against the Kinder Morgan pipeline, or against the Canadian government pipeline, I guess we'll call it now, as construction continues on this project. And today is nothing compared to what I think you're going to see on Burnaby Mountain over time, as we're probably talking hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people, probably likely willing to be arrested for civil disobedience for defying the injunction there. So the long proverbial hot summer is about to begin, and there's going to be a lot of protesters, and a lot of protesters arrested quite willingly. They want to make their stand on this pipeline.
Joining us from Victoria is Caitlin Vernon, campaigns director for the Sierra Club. Thanks for joining us.
It's completely outrageous that Prime Minister Trudeau would commit to spend billions of public funds to bail out a multinational corporation when we could be creating far more jobs by investing in a clean energy economy instead. Kinder Morgan knows that this is a risky investment. That's why they want out. That's why they're saying that today is a good day. And so for Ottawa to pour billions of dollars into this unwanted pipeline, here's the thing, no matter who owns the pipeline, the risks are the same. It still faces substantial financial risk, there's huge ecological risk, environmental risk, and it faces multiple legal challenges that are ongoing which could still stop the project in court.
Okay, Caitlin, the federal government has always been on record of supporting the Kinder Morgan expansion, but did this move in particular come as a surprise to you?
Well, interestingly, Prime Minister Trudeau and his government were elected on a promise of Indigenous reconciliation and a promise of climate action and a promise to put the Kinder Morgan pipeline to a proper review. Today's announcement does none of those things. The follow-up review that they put the pipeline to was a total farce. It has no credibility, today's announcement is basically a slap in the face to Indigenous reconciliation and any commitment to climate action. So they've betrayed their promises. It's a terrible financial decision. It's a risky investment to be spending billions of dollars of taxpayer money. And we're not just talking $4.5 billion. We're also talking the probably over $7 billion of construction plus possible costs of construction delays and cost overruns and so on. So we're looking at more like $12 billion of taxpayer.
If the project isn't sold, which of course is what the federal government is saying it wants to do, but I want to take a step back there, something that you mentioned about the environmental review process. Why do you say the environmental review process was flawed?
The original National Energy Board process lacked opportunities for public participation. It's facing multiple legal challenges around inadequate consultation of Indigenous rights. There was no cross-examination allowed. There's a long litany of problems with that process, which is exactly why Trudeau was elected on a promise to do something additional. The additional process had no teeth. They made some recommendations that weren't abided by, and in fact recent evidence shows that that whole thing was rigged and that federal bureaucrats had decided to make the decision to approve the project prior to any consultation with First Nations. So this is still playing out before the courts. And I think one important thing to keep in mind today is that ultimately today's announcement doesn't change anything. The risks are still there, the opposition is still there.
So the fact that the federal government is now responsible for the pipeline, you say doesn't reduce the environmental risk in any way?
That's correct. It doesn't matter who owns it. You know, we're talking 400 tankers a year in the Salish Sea, likely to put the endangered orca whales, make them extinct even without an oil spill. It doesn't matter who owns it. You know, the possibility of an oil spill and the impacts, we're talking about 98,000 jobs that depend on a healthy coastal economy. This is not just an environmental issue. This is about communities. I think that Prime Minister Trudeau has underestimated how much British Columbians love this coast and are willing to do what it takes to protect it.
But only a solid 20% of the population of BC is against the project. 54% in a recent poll, and the numbers are gaining, are in favor of it. So how do you square those numbers?
Well, first off, I don't particularly trust polls. I also know that in the past week there's been rallies in Seattle and in Quebec. Over 230 organizations from 44 countries around the world recently sent a letter to Trudeau calling for the cancellation of the Kinder Morgan project. The world is watching. I think the world is waking up to the fact that despite good talk around Indigenous reconciliation and climate action, Trudeau's actions speak louder than words, and he's not living up to those international commitments.
The Sierra Club's Caitlin Vernon. Thank you so much for joining us, Caitlin.
Thank you.